Welcome back to the Health Rebels podcast. Today, we're talking about stress management. Now, if you're familiar with the holistic wheel, Health Rebels always coaches on 6 components of a healthy lifestyle. Right? First, we got mindset, then we got activity, nutrition, sleep, stress management, and supportive accountability. The reason that stress management is part of the holistic wheel, part of healthy lifestyles, is twofold. One, there's a physiological reason for this. You've probably heard a lot of people talk about how stress is such a killer, blah, blah, blah. It's a little exaggerated, but completely true. And it's this weird mechanism. We can talk about the stress prism in a later podcast. But today, what I want to talk about is really kind of the lifestyle factors that it does, right? Stress can derail us. It can crush our motivation, and it can get us off the positive behaviors that we want to have, right? Stress can be really derailing to your healthy habits. So thinking about stress management, one, has a physiological benefit, changes the cortisol level, it changes your biochemistry. It's going to change the outcome with your healthy habits. But two, it can also insulate us from the distractions that pull us away, or from the hardships that throw curveballs our way. Look, if life does nothing else, it is really good at throwing curveballs. So stress management's really important. And there's a super simple little stress management rule that I like to give clients. It's called the 90-10 framework. And this is one of those things that can radically reduce stress by running each situation through a quick little filter called the 90-10 framework. And then you discover that a lot of people have excessive amounts of stress about things that don't ultimately matter to them, that don't bring them joy, don't bring them satisfaction, and down the road, ultimately, will have either no impact or very trivial impact in their life. And we'll give an example of that as we go along. Now, obviously, we rushed into the podcast. I'm excited to be here today. I really love the 90-10 framework, and I'm going to give that to you in a minute. But first, hey, if you've been enjoying the Health Rebels podcast, if this helps you redefine healthy living in a way that's approachable and sustainable, can you do me a favor? On your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever, if you have a place that you can you leave a review on the podcast? It gives a little bump to the algorithm. It lets more people see it. And heck, if you're watching it in a place where there's a share button down below, like the video podcast on Facebook or the video podcast on YouTube, if there's a share option, go ahead and click this and share with someone that you care about. But that's enough about me and the self-plugs and the promotions. Let's go ahead and talk about the 90-10 framework. So this is a genius little set of rules that I love to follow. But I like to run all of my decisions, or as many decisions as possible, by 2 individuals. I like to run them first by myself at the age of 90, and then myself at the age of 10. And before I make a decision, especially on big or small decisions, I try to figure out if I can get consensus from both individuals, from 90-year-old Steve and 10-year-old Steve. Now, let me reveal a little bit behind this. 90-year-old Steve only really cares about a couple things. He only cares about the decisions that are going to help me be healthy, right? 90-year-old Steve doesn't want to be decrepit or in assisted care. He wants to be alive, right? 90-year-old Steve wants to be healthy, but also wants to have a fair bit of money, right? It's easier to retire when you have some money. So healthy, wealthy, and he doesn't want to be too dumb. So 90-year-old Steve wants me to make the decisions today that will allow me to become healthier, wealthier, and smarter. My 10-year-old self, this one's easier to figure out because you don't have to imagine. We've all been in 3rd grade. I think 10-year-olds are like 3rd grade, 2nd grade, something around there. I can remember the decisions I made then, right? And 10-year-old Steve just cared about 2 things. He wanted to have fun and he wanted to be happy, right? And this is something that we often lose as adults. We lose that childlike wonder, that presence, that being able to enjoy the moment, and that happiness, right? We often get so caught up in must and shoulds and to-do lists and obligations and work commitments. We forget to enjoy the moment, right? And then we've talked about this. It was an early episode on the Health Rebels podcast. I think it was somewhere around episode 20. But we talked about one of the healthiest habits people can actually have is having a hobby, right? It doesn't physically affect your physical health, but it can definitely help with our mental health, right? It gives us that satisfaction. They tend to be active, so they can be a little bit on the physical side. But hobbies create more satisfaction, more contentment, more happiness that allows us to consistently do good things. So by listening to the 10-year-old self, I'm trying to make decisions that allow me to be happier. Now, let's put this in action. Let's give an example. This is a really trivial, meaningless example, but it only became meaningless because of the 90-10 framework. In a couple weeks, I am going to Minnesota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, en route to going to Green Bay, Wisconsin with a couple buddies of mine, right? There weren't any real great flights into Green Bay, Wisconsin because it's a small town, middle of the week. Not a lot of flights going there. So we're going to Minneapolis, and then we're going to drive to Green Bay. We're going to watch a football game. It's going to be a great time. I love the Packers. My buddy's a Titans fan. We're going to the Titans game, so he's going to experience Lambeau. It's going to be a great time. But getting a car out of Minnesota in the middle of November can be a little hairy to rent a vehicle, right? Is it going to snow? Should we try to save a couple bucks with the economy vehicle, or should we play it safe and get the all-wheel drive or the four-wheel drive vehicles, right? Should we anticipate the winter weather? Now, this was a couple weeks ago when we were having this debate and this argument, and it was starting to get heated. Like, there were tempers flaring. I was feeling a little mad. And so what I did was I ran this through the 90-10 framework. My 90-year-old self, I asked him what vehicle we should get. And he, if we can pretend that he exists, right? He said, I don't friggin' care. Like, that was 60 years ago. I don't even remember what car we got. It doesn't matter. I don't give a shit. Which, as an aside, the personality I imagine my 90-year-old self, just kind of a grumpy old man on the porch saying, I don't care a shit about anything, right? Just get off my lawn and don't bother me, right? That's the 90-year-old self I imagine I'm going to be. But anyway, because it wasn't going to matter, 90-year-old self didn't care. My 10-year-old self also didn't care. Doesn't know that much about cars, doesn't care about cars, doesn't know that much about like winter weathers or fall time weathers or planning stuff. And he does know arguments are not fun. Arguments are not fun. They're not going to make you have fun. They're not going to help you be happy. So 90-year-old self didn't want me to argue. 10-year-old self didn't want me to argue. The situation was starting to become stressful, but running it through that filter, I realized, like, it doesn't matter. I don't really care. It really doesn't matter. I'm not going to stress about it. I put in my 2 cents, and then I checked out of the conversation. I let my other 2 buddies continue to debate and argue and get mad and get stressed out at each other. But my 90-10 framework told me I shouldn't. Now, my 10-year-old self, if we're honest, does like to tell a lot of jokes. So I would occasionally chime in with the text messages with a snarky, sarcastic comment just to help me laugh a little bit during the situation. 10-year-old self was happy with that. But yeah, the 90-10 framework is a way to get like an imaginary council with yourself and run the situations through and figure out how to make decisions with a significantly less amount of stress, right? When we're thinking about work environments, you can run that through. When we're thinking about other decisions, right? If we're thinking about what gym membership to get to or all this different stuff, right? The 90-year-old self there wants you to have some gym membership because they want you to be healthy at that age, right? But then some of the decisions might be less significant than we think they are, right? So I like to use the 90-10 framework. It really helps us identify what's important and what's not. And if we're completely honest, in the modern world, there's a ton of things constantly screaming at us. We talked about this a couple episodes ago with intuitive eating, but we are in a world where everything's constantly screaming at us. and it's not as important as we think it is. It always feels like there's fires to put out. You're never going to solve every problem. And so having a filter that allows you to decide what is important and what's not can help reduce a significant amount of pointless stress in your life. And that's why I suggest the 90-10 framework. It's something that I really enjoy. I have a lot of fun with it. I have this like made up personality type that's, I chuckle to myself every time I pretend to be the 90-year-old Steve going, I don't give a shit about that. It's like Bob Ross cleaning his paintbrush, right? It just always makes you chuckle. But it's great. And I highly recommend you use that as well, right? The 90-10 framework can help you really make decisions. You want to try to get both of those people happy. You want to get your 90-year-old self and your 10-year-old self. You want to set yourself up for the future and have fun in the moment. But if you can't get both, you at least want one. And if you can't get any, like I couldn't get with the debate about a car, then it's not a pointless, it's not a reason to have stress. It's a good reason to just kind of walk away from it. Like I walked away with the debate. I put in my 2 cents, didn't matter. Whatever car they decide on, it'll be the car. I won't remember it in 60 years. It doesn't matter. So that's what I got for you today. Again, if you leave me a review, send me a screenshot, send an email with a screenshot of your review. Leave an objective review. You don't have to try to compliment or do all that stuff. I just want to know really, what are you enjoying about the show? What are ways that the show might be able to improve? And let me know what your thoughts are. Send me a screenshot to steven@healthrebels.us. Email that on over and I will get you a free recipe book. It's a high protein recipe book. It's got 55 different recipes in it. And it's a great way to kind of expand your healthy eating habits and enjoy the food that you're eating. If you can leave me a review, send me proof and I'll send that your way. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. We didn't talk about the Rebel Oath in the start, but we did get to talk about the holistic wheel. But you should know by now the Rebel Oath. Rebel Oath says to reject extremes, energize yourself with healthy habits, break free from common standards, excite yourself about your potential, and ultimately love yourself and act accordingly. And that's the Rebel Oath. And as a health rebel, I encourage you to do that. And until I see you again next week for another episode of the Health Rebels podcast, you know what to do, Rebel. Keep the oath.